I'm scared.
I want something here. Message. No,
Yep.
Okay.
I remember you started preaching on a little bit last week. Got me all nervous and don't get my stuff, but you didn't, so I think I'm good.
okay.
Okay, the children of Israel in bondage. Yeah, we do know the story pretty good, so I'll just kind of go over the, I guess the main part of the first part of it is the slavery part, which we all know what slavery is and what it does. The main thing that slavery does is control you. It controlled the Israelites in all the aspects of their life.
Yeah.
And their numbers grew up. Pharaoh became afraid of them because there were so many, so he put them into slavery, building all their stone bricks and stuff for all their buildings and all their stuff they were making. So they really controlled every aspect of their life. They really had no free will anymore. And that's really what sin does to us when we get into bondage.
Yes.
As it starts to control our life, it compounds more and more and kind of takes over. So we never usually don't intend to get into that sort of thing, but we just find ourselves into it, and that's kind of what happened to the Israelites. And I watched a video about this girl who got addicted to drugs, and that kind of brought up to mind was this whole bondage thing. And she didn't intend to get into it, but she got into the wrong crowd. It's kind of a story we hear a lot. The young kids will get into a crowd of friends, and they'll start with the small drugs. And eventually one day she tried, I think it was heroin. And it really got a hold of her. I mean, the first time she tried it, she got addicted to it. And her whole life started being controlled by this addiction, from just the need to have it and the expense of it. I mean, it was hundreds of dollars a day. I don't know how she could afford it. I was wondering before they really got into the store, I'm like, wow, this is an awful lot of money. But she'd do anything to get the money to get the heroin. And so that's what that drug does, and that's what sin does. It starts to consume us and just control every aspect of our
Yes,
life.
yes.
So let's get back to the Israelites. And with Moses comes along and he tells Pharaoh, let my children go. Pharaoh says, no, I don't think that's going to happen. So God comes and starts hitting them with plague after plague.
Yeah.
Finally he says, okay, go ahead, get your people and get out of here. So they leave. And Pharaoh decides, I kind of changed my mind, so they go after him. They get to the Red Sea. Moses parts the Red Sea. The Israelites goes on across. And then Pharaoh comes with his army after him, and goes through the sea, and the sea closes in on them. They all die. And there's the Israelites at the edge of the Red Sea. And as far as God was concerned, or what they were concerned, is God promised them the promised land.
Yes.
They were thinking, well, we get out of this bondage. Well, in this land of milk and honey, everything's going to be great. It's going to be easy living from here on out. But that's not what happened. They're there staring in front of a wilderness.
Yeah.
Instead of milk and honey, it's sand and cactuses and everything else. So what do? They start to complain. They start to murmur about Moses and Aaron. They don't have anything to drink. They don't have food.
Right.
They were going to die out in the desert, and it's complaint after complaint after complaint.
Yes.
And finally Moses says to him, you're not really complaining against me. God's in control of this whole thing. All this complaining you're doing, you're complaining against God. And you're getting on his last nerve.
Amen.
So what they had to do was they actually had to, through time, is learn to trust God to meet their needs.
Yes.
And that didn't just happen in a day or two. That was day after day after day of God providing all their needs. And another problem that arose was the fighting and bickering amongst the people. And Moses, being the only godly man, was in between all of them. He had to take everybody's problems and listen to them and come up with an idea for them to get along. And this took up most of his time. So finally, his father-in-law was there visiting and saw this was going on and said, this isn't working. You're spending all your time dealing with these people when you could be doing so much else. So he came up with the idea of Moses picking out certain people to judge over certain groups of people.
Amen.
He says you have one guy over like a group of 10 to kind of control to kind of judge what's going on in between them, the little squabbles. You have another guy over those groups of 50s and the groups of hundreds and groups of thousands. And all these smaller groups try to have the guy judge it and get it resolved. If they can't, move on up to the next level.
Yeah.
If they can't get it And that's kind of what we have today is our judicial system. If I get like a speeding ticket, I don't go to the U.S. Supreme Court and have it decided, I'll go to my local court.
Right,
And if it
right.
doesn't get solved there, we get to go to the next one, the next level, and build up. That all had to be come about. They didn't have that when we left Egypt. And another thing is the Ten Commandments, which is kind of my favorite, is that God had to actually provide rules for them to be able to live together, and they had to be such strong rules that he had to have them carved in stone. And they're just basic things that we take for granted today, like you cannot kill people. To them, that must have been a shock. I mean, they couldn't understand that, but it had to be taught to them.
Amen.
And you can't steal, can't commit adultery, can't
Amen.
do this and that. Stuff we take for granted today, but that all had to come from somewhere. And when they left slavery, the reason they were in this wilderness is they had to learn to be free. And that kind of sounds strange for us because we were born free, so it's all natural for us.
Right.
But they didn't have that. They had to learn it day by day, how to get along, how to learn these rules and apply these rules in their lives and be able to trust God for their needs. And if they would have went straight from Egypt straight to the Promised Land, they would have brought all that uncertainty with them. And the Promised Land would have just been chaos.
That's bad.
And that's kind of, if we go back to the girl I was talking about that was on drugs, it's kind of the same thing. When we get into sin and we want to get out of that sin, we don't just break free and that's it. There's a wilderness that we have to go through also.
Yes, yes.
And that girl in that story, I think she started out in the drugs when she was a teenager, and about the age of 25, she decided she wanted out. She could see it was ruining her life. But it affected so much areas of her life, it made it so much more difficult. It wasn't just getting off the drug and the withdrawals that she had to. Her family and friends really didn't want nothing to do with her, and they couldn't trust her because she'd lie to them and steal and do anything to get money.
Amen.
The health problems that came with the drugs. I mean, she looked like she was 20 years older than she was. You wouldn't recognize her as a 25-year-old. It was just, the drugs were just ruining her body, and she was very unhealthy. And also to get that money, she went into prostitution because it was so expensive.
Yes.
And so
yes,
all the risks
yes.
that go with that is she should get beat up all the time,
Yep.
and the diseases that come with it. And it was just a step-by-step process of dealing with all this other stuff. Not only the main sin, but to get rid of all the other stuff that the sin brought upon her.
Amen.
And that was like a walk she had to go through. That was her wilderness to get completely free from that sin.
Amen.
Because the goal is to get free from the sin, but it's just not dropping the sin and being free. There's a path you have to walk. And that's kind of what the word Exodus means. It comes from Greek. The word ex means out. And the word hodos means a way out or a passage. So when the Israelites wanted to be free from the slavery in Egypt, God provided a way out,
Amen.
a path forward.
That's right.
But they had to walk that path.
Amen.
And it was very difficult for them.
Yes, that's it. That's it.
Yeah.
And it was difficult, and some of them even wanted to turn back because it was so difficult. And it's kind of hard to imagine if you're in slavery and in bondage that bad, and you have a chance to be free, how could you want to go back?
Yeah.
But then I think of like men in prison that went in when they were 18 from a really bad crime, and they're in there for decades and decades. And when they're like 65, they're finally let out, and they're letting out to this world that they don't recognize anymore.
Right.
And they have to struggle so much. They're so used to their lives being controlled,
Yes.
thing by thing, by step, that when they have to do it themselves, it's just too much for them. And some of them will commit a crime just to get back in, because
Yes.
they can't handle this wilderness they have to walk through to be completely free of that bondage.
Amen.
And then you kind of wonder, well, how long is this wilderness last for? You don't want to be in there forever.
Yeah, that's right.
So the answer to that is, how committed are you to being free from that sin?
There you
Amen.
go.
So once you start walking that path, do you hate the sin that you're in?
Yeah.
Are you going to be just focused on getting it over and move forward and not stop and not look back?
Amen.
Or are you going to be wandering around in circles, thinking, well, that sin was bad, but this wilderness is just as bad or even worse? Or maybe the sin wasn't as bad as I thought, it was easier when I did it,
Yeah.
instead of going round and around just like the Israelites did. So the best thing to do is to be committed to get rid of that sin and realize there's a wilderness to walk through and to hit that path and not stop.
Amen. 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 Amen.
Good, good.
You got anything?
No.
Okay.